Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. My name is Oge Zakoli, and I am honored to be introducing and moderating this afternoon's session. Hope you all have been enjoying our PM Symposium today, and we'll continue to enjoy this session and the remaining sessions for the rest of the afternoon. Today's presentation is called 5 Winning Actions for Project Management in Today's Uncertain World, and our speaker is Dr. Susie Best. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. First of all, today's session is being recorded. Secondly, all of your microphones are muted and will stay muted until the end of the presentation. After the presentation, we will have 15 minutes of Q&A. At this point, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask your questions directly to Dr. Best. And we encourage you to do so to make this session as interactive as possible. Alternatively, you can post your questions in the chat box. Myself and the other moderator, we will be monitoring the chat, and then we can ask questions on your behalf. Third, we want to remind you to please provide your feedback to us. We are very interested in your feedback as it's helpful for us in planning next year's PM Symposium, as well as our other professional development programs. So you can provide your feedback by clicking on the post-session survey link, which will be posted in the chat box, or you can use the QR code located in the program book. Either way, we assure you that all of your responses will remain strictly confidential. As I mentioned, the session is being recorded, and the session recording for this session and most of the other presentations throughout the symposium will be available on our website, where it will remain there for 30 days on demand. So as registered attendees, you will be able to access them and watch other sessions that you may not have been able to attend today. We'll also post a link to our website in the chat box. And lastly, if you are a PMI member and you provided your PMI member ID during registration, PMI Chicagoland will report your main session PDUs on your behalf. We just ask that you fill out the attendance form if you haven't already by using the QR code located in the program book or the link that's provided there, and allow 15 to 20 business days for the PDUs to post on your PMI membership dashboard. If you have any questions about PDUs or anything related, we encourage you to reach out to our VP of Professional Development, and we'll post her email address in the chat box as well. And now, without further ado, I'm very proud to introduce our speaker, Dr. Susie Best. She is a Global Human Resources Manager with a current focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is the Global Director of Employee and Business Resource Groups for Allstate Insurance Company. She has over 18 years of professional experience that span the corporate and nonprofit sectors. Additionally, she is a bilingual psychologist, consultant, professor, international speaker, and executive coach. Also, she's the founder and president of Thrive Group International, which provides executive leadership development, coaching, and consulting services to a variety of organizations. So welcome, Dr. Best.
Thank you so much, Oge, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have you all choose to join. We know it's a Saturday and the afternoon, but I myself have really enjoyed many parts of the conference, with Scott starting us off, really understanding bigger picture, how change can impact us and the grief and loss that can happen, and the panel that kind of blew our minds with some of the newest trends. It's been wonderful. I was actually joking but serious at the same time with even how much change is needed and how much we resist change, as just observing some of our reactions when it came to joining today's conference and Zoom not being exactly the same as we're used to it being, and just how for some of us it was a little more difficult to adapt to the change and flex with the change and learn. But the beauty is that we're all created to be able to be adaptable for change and to figure out tools and skills for that. And so I'm honored to be able to be here. Thank you, Oge and PMI Chicagoland, for providing me this opportunity to share with others some of the tips around change management. So a little bit, Oge has already introduced me. I do live in the Chicagoland area. I'm from St. Croix, Virgin Islands, which is really important for me. And I'm one of those that still call my home home, and my mom and my one of my siblings still lives there. So it's a very real part of me. So change is one of those things, changing to a very different environment of Chicago compared to the Caribbean, languages, culture. There are big macro changes like that we have gone through. And then there's micro changes, like getting used to Zoom being a little different than what we're typically used to. But the point is that no matter what, we're constantly needing to learn, grow, and adapt. And that's also what the panel was warning us on, and that the one certainty these days is uncertainty. And as soon as you get used to your one phone app or app on your computer or the way of doing something technologically, there's an update. And then you've got to figure out how to use the newest, greatest update, or as project managers, just how often you have to use a new tool or adapt to a new tool. So I just think that this was a great topic for us to be able to have to work through. I'm gonna switch my slides here. So as an abstract, just kind of the summary, given that we are living in what many of you have probably heard, that VUCA world, volatile, there's lots of, whether it's weather, politics, so many topics, the volatility, even at times lately of the stock market, but just volatility, uncertainty, complexity of things, airline travel. While more of us can travel now, it's more complex. There's a lot more people who are upset or frustrated, lots of delays, and then ambiguous, where are we back in the office? Are we not back in the office? Is the restaurant you love going to be open when you get there? Thank goodness for apps like Google Apps that tell us if something's closed, and often is right, but not always. So just the fact that we're in this VUCA time on a global scale. For me and my work, it's actually one of the things that has helped, is that many of the things that we are going through at this point is not local to one particular area, but is global. I feel like it's helped us come together more when we're working on certain initiatives, because it actually helps us try to solve problems around human resources, talent, creating and successfully executing projects when we understand that each of us is working and struggling with kids back and forth in and out of school, or trying to do it online, or having grief around someone or ourselves having COVID or a loss, or flooding or fires. So there's just things that more of us can relate to. And then as project managers, how as an individual contributor or as a leader do we upskill in these winning ways? And I will tell you that for anyone who's got their pen and paper out, or you're ready to be a note taker and you're looking for the 5, I'm going to let you know what the 5 are, or you'll keep looking. And I just thought about that later as a professor. I was like, there's going to be that person who's like, I never got what exactly are the 5. So the 5, just so you're prepared, are the why of change and why we should be looking at this and talking about it. The whom does this impact? And then where does inclusion fit into this model? How do we focus on ourselves, and how do we take action? So those are the 5 things that we're going to be kind of focused on. And the goal and objective is accepting the priority of upskilling, that it's a constant, again, whether the upskilling is so important with so many companies making changes, so many technologies changing, so many ways that platforms are making things either easier for us or more interactive, as well as some of the responsibility on us to be more aware of tools, as one of the panelists talked about, that if something is too complex for our client or our consumer, then it's really on us to own how we can better our technology to make it more user-friendly and customer-based. And I thought that was a really good example. And so how can the why and whom of inclusion and focus on knowing self, and the how and know of our actions produce better results? So that's your 5 in there. And then how to use those best practices to embrace change and help others do it as well. I know on a lot of projects I'm working on that our project manager, it's a variety. Some are simply very clearly will tell us multiple times, I'm just the project manager. Please don't ask this. The list of what they boundary us around is quite long. And then there's others who are willing to kind of empathize or think through things or listen to what we're trying to solve for, or what in our agile world, what we've been able to uncover as opportunity areas, and how we can pivot. And so just being able to say, how do we have skills that help others work with us in accomplishing the project that we're trying to work on? So first in that why. Well, if you haven't been convinced in today's conference and just life in general, just as a reminder, change is everywhere. Even for this being Chicagoland-based conference, whether you're in Chicagoland or not, at least in Chicagoland, this is a time of the year where change is everywhere. Literally, as we look around, the beautiful color changes in the leaves. We're about to change time between tonight and tomorrow. We have the weather changing, lots of cold weather. You've got to look at the weather app or something at all times, or be too hot or too cold, not having prepared. So just changes everywhere. Never mind the things that we often talk about, COVID-19, virtual work versus working in person or hybrid, transformational growth. Many of the companies we work at are talking about growth on some level. What does it mean to transform companies to adapt better to technology, to meet their goals and outcomes faster, better, more improved? Talent assessment and organizational changes. So whether it's that lots of people are participating in the Great Resignation in our company, or we're the new person at a company, or our company is looking for talent or creating org changes, there's constant adaptation to change at work. And then racial injustice and unrest is a reality that constantly is in the news. Even right now with Ahmaud Arbery's, the trial that's happening there with the case of those that are charged with having killed him. There's always something happening in the news around racial injustice and unrest. And then natural disasters. There's a flooding in one place and a drought somewhere else, and socio-political issues constantly, even right now with, are we going to be able to have a budget passed as the United States or not? What's happening with climate change? Those are issues that we constantly hear about and are invited to adapt in some way. So as we look at those changes and they're external that we're focused on in this moment on this slide, and within our lives, change is coming to us both in a lot of ways externally. So we may choose to start school, graduate, get married, get in a relationship, get out of a relationship. Those are changes we may choose. Move, change jobs, change careers, not just jobs. And so there's choices we make that cause us to have to really adapt to change. And then there's choices that, as we just mentioned, the many myriad of opportunities where life is changing against us or with us or out of our choice range. And so those internal and external changes can pile on top of each other and make life a little overwhelming, even if we're the ones that made most of those choices. It can still create a bit of stress or overwhelm. So in that image, it just talks about the natural diet of things these days is change. And without leadership ownership, it's not the real thing. So just really, what does it look like as you do your role as a project manager to know that not only to give yourself the grace that you are going through a lot of these changes, and projects have all of these things that are impacting the ability to be stable. How do you continue to go through that? Sorry, went too far. No, I'm just going way, way, way too far. Hang on one second. There we go. So now the next one is who gets impacted and how in the awareness of the change process. So we heard earlier from Scott in the keynote this morning that one way to look at change is through the grief process. And this is just the change curve. And I really like this one because it offers a lot of different aspects to change that I would recommend holding this. I've used this a lot when I'm rolling out a change myself as a leader. I actually take a copy of this change curve and utilize it or overlay the actual change that is being rolled out and invite people to kind of keep it handy, and the leaders I work with and coach to keep it handy as they roll out a change so that people can keep going back to it and keep looking at where they are. Because many times we start in one space and we find ourselves in another, and then we go back to another part of this curve. So if we look at this change and we think about, for example, the vaccination, if that was something you wanted to have happen as a change in response to COVID. First, it was that anticipation that good, an end can come to my, having to be socially distant. I can do all these things, this excitement, and then comes confusion as to, does it really work? Doesn't it? Which one to take? How do we, how do you do the booster? Don't you? Some anger, fear, frustration, cynicism. We're seeing that constantly. That can happen again to ourselves or others. Hope and skepticism as there's a lessening of COVID in certain locations, or curiosity. Is it going to work now that they're rolling it out with kids? And then in that new beginning, for some, relief as you're able to start to fly around, trust and excitement as you feel freer to do things, to take your mask off, to hug friends, to visit family members. So that's just an example to have us ground in the reality of how we go through these curves. And then again, something can happen as you see resistance. Someday, maybe I want to see what happens, neutral zone. Okay, let's adapt, let's get used to this. And now I'm used to it. So this can even be, again, staying at home and working remote, or transitioning back to the office, or being in a hybrid, what this looks like, and that we can consistently vacillate in how we're approaching this, as can those we're leading. Team members, family members can also go through those changes. So a couple things to keep in mind are that each of the stages have feelings that go with it. So whether we're in that first cusp of accepting a change, there are feelings that go with it. In that middle place of that neutral zone, and then in the really adapting to the new beginning. And each individual will experience it differently. You can have an identical twin and go through the exact same change and still have different ways that you're adapting and getting used to and experiencing the change. So just really, again, being able to work through that. And then as a project manager, often you're the one introducing or facilitating a change. That project you're working on, owning, managing, often is including people to go from one place to another in something. Even if it's a fantastic thing, it can be still working on change. And so being able to create a space for this model to be incorporated in how you approach your projects can often help, as it creates space for how people will adapt. Even if the change is something phenomenal, they still might go through the why should I have to do this, the frustration of going from the old to the new, and then the accepting it. So really being able to have that as a way of incorporating it for others. I love David Rock's SCARF model as it helps us have a way of understanding change and understanding our brain. It really, for me, helps with clients as they go through change, or helping clients and leaders, executives manage change, because then we're able to have more empathy. We are not just human beings who we can program something in and voila, we've adapted. We have our frontal lobes, we're engaged, we have a way we're used to doing things. And so being able to have more empathy for how people are accepting or accommodating or listening in for our change is really important to accept for ourselves the neuroscience to this. I do think, and I do observe, that both leaders that I work with, project managers I work with, who seem to have a winning model or a winning way, either on purpose have adopted a model similar to the SCARF model or the SCARF model itself, or naturally are really good at this. And so it's looking at status, which is our relative ability to understand a change in comparison to others. Certainty, our ability to accept the certainty or uncertainty of the future. Autonomy, how much we sense that we have control of a situation, relatedness, how we're able to adapt to that, and then fairness, how we perceive the change to impact the fairness in our world. And just, again, this is for ourselves and others. So when you look at this and the model that we just were looking at before, just ask yourself, where are you? If you think or pick one particular change, I want you to just take a minute. You don't have to put it in the chat, but if you'd like to, feel free. When you look at change and you look at what's happening for you in change, how would you say you're doing relative to change? How important, what is standing out to you? Where are you on that change curve with a major change in your life, whether it was a voluntary change or life imposed upon you change? How are you doing in the change curve model? And then where do you fall when it comes to triggers? If the change impacts your status or the certainty in life that you have, or your freedom, autonomy, your perceived freedom, or how you feel related to others, or how fair it is? Which one do you see yourself being most triggered by when change is inevitable or when you're going through a change? So I'll just pause for you to take a moment to reflect. And like I said, feel free to share in the chat if you'd like, or simply just think about it to yourself. So next, as we think about things, the first is self and then the other is others. And so when you think about the SCARF model in relationship to others, so if you're rolling out a change, and here what I did was I just used, if you as a project manager were helping a company moderate or model some job changes where you were downsizing or upskilling or changing org changes, how would you better understand yourself and others amidst the change or uncertainty? So with the SCARF model, if you were building your project to incorporate the SCARF model in the change, you'd look at the threats and the rewards. So knowing that some are going to feel constant guilt for being selected to stay or to be moved to the newer team or to be promoted. And then yet a reward is going to be relieved to have a job and feel safe and valued in the change. And then for the certainty piece, that some of, again, for you or the clients that you're leading through this, certainty is the threat is uncertain about their own future, because while I made it this cut, what's going to happen with the next org change? And then the certainty, the reward part is like, okay, I'm good for now. This at least covers me as I look for something else, or at least for the next 6 months, I know I have some stability. And then autonomy, the threat feeling like even if I got to stay, I know in being a part of a large scale company reorg a couple years ago, that even for those that stayed, for many, they felt really good about the change and being able to be one of the ones that stayed. But for some, they honestly felt a little disappointed they weren't given a package, that their perception, for some that I coached that were given the package to leave, they had a lot of grief and loss and felt like it was hard to go through the lack of having the opportunity to make the choice. And then for others, they perceive this package as having been something they wished they could have. So just that autonomy can really trigger us one way or another. And then relatedness, if your company has a major change or you're helping a company go through a major change, just really being aware that people are going to perceive that loss of friendships, of the SME, of information, or the person who helped them with engagement, and then the desire to support others within the change. And then it can also, the fairness factor, it can seem unfair of who's being promoted or who's not, who's being let go, who's being kept. And it was the same process used across the board for everyone. So in thinking about your current job, past projects, or projects that you see coming up in your near future, just think through how might you incorporate thoughts about this for yourself or others. When you think about clients you've had or team members or those you've led, can you clearly see which one of the SCARF model needs most speaks to them? The reason I pause and ask you to consider it is, for me, with my coaching and consulting, many times what I'm doing is really helping a client or a leader think through the majority of their team or key stakeholders on their team, which trigger most impacts those particular people. Because if we can figure out what is most triggering, we can be more clear about it, but we also look to see how we can incorporate best practices for each one of these. How can we be clear about the status, if these are going to be org changes or how this impacts people's status? How can we provide any level of certainty? What are we clear about? What do we know for certain? And how can we make sure what's certain is very clearly articulated so that all the pieces that are uncertain are left for us to have room to solve for, while the uncertainties remain? And then autonomy, what are the things we can give people choice around? So for all the spaces and places they'll feel like they had no choice, what are the things that we can give them to choose from to build that autonomy? Relatedness, how can we make sure that we're relating? How do we make sure ourselves that we say with empathy where we see difficulties and with wins where we see wins, but how can we make sure that we're relating to people? Some of this takes making sure that we're aware of current events. For example, for some among us, some of our coworkers just celebrated Diwali. And so what is that like, just to make sure we're aware of what they may be going through to have to work on a holiday, or that they took off the day to just ask how they might be celebrating it, but just to make sure that we're relating to people if we have heard that someone was impacted by a loss with COVID. So then the next is how to start to pull it together. When we become more aware of ourselves and where we might be triggered or what might happen for us in the SCARF model, and then others, and that being really important, because I know myself as a person, and for many of us just as humans, what our trigger is what we focus on, just with our unconscious bias, assuming that others are most triggered by that particular one. So for example, if autonomy is my most sensitive space and that perceived need for freedom, I might do a really good job of managing every aspect of how to make sure people feel that they have a space of choice. And where I might have a big tolerance for uncertainty, I leave a lot in the uncertain space. It's really good to be aware of that other category, because that's where it's really important as you look through and work through a project and look at what are all the things to consider, that you use that SCARF model so that it keeps away our bias from what we're most triggered by and helps us include more aspects of what is important for more people. The questions just to ask yourself: what change is affecting you most now? And what change is affecting those on your team most right now? So take a moment in the chat to just go ahead and share what change is affecting you most right now. When you think about changes, it could be one of these bullets that we have is in terms of COVID-19 virtual work. That can mean, again, you're working virtually or you're not anymore, wishing you were, or you're hybrid. Transformational growth, that there's some type of growth and change within your company. Talent assessments or org changes as the year is wrapping up. Racial injustice and unrest, natural disasters, socio-political issues. What is impacting you the most? Just take a moment, and if you could please share in the chat as much as you're comfortable, what change is it affecting you most, whether it's because it's affecting you personally the most or it's affecting your team. For example, for me, transformational growth, I wouldn't choose for myself, but for the team I'm leading, that's impacting them the most. So it impacts me and my work because that's where my focus has to stay. And then a couple weeks ago, the natural disasters for a portion of our team was what was impacting our team and needing to really be more patient as some people had to take time off because of how the natural disaster was impacting them. So awareness of what those external issues are that may be impacting you or your colleagues is really important. If you work with global teams or teams just even across the country, whether in person or not, even if you are back to work, not assuming that what you're experiencing is what everyone else is experiencing. So really making sure that you're a bit more curious, as it says here, get curious of what's impacting you and others the most. Listen in. I would challenge you to take the SCARF model, write it out, and just listen for this coming week. Listen to others and guess for yourself, based on what they're saying as a praise, as a gratitude, or as a complaint, which part of the SCARF model most impacts this particular person? Or if you have a roommate, a spouse, a family member that you're close to, spend the rest of this weekend or this coming week really listening and picking, sounds like this one is probably most important to this person. And you could even go as far as reflecting on that to them, like, sounds like you're really excited because the new job is going to give you a lot of freedom, a lot of ability to make your own choices. And if they go, yes, I can't wait. I've been sick and tired of having everyone make the choices for me and not being able to use my own skill sets. Then you can say, check, yes, autonomy is really important to this person. And so just being able to practice this will help you become better at your work as you manage projects, because rather than just get frustrated with why someone has become less engaged or less participatory in your moving a project along, you can really sit back, have a conversation, ask some questions, get curious, say, what about this is becoming difficult? Or I notice you're not as engaged or not participating as much. Can you help me understand what's happening? And really listen in to see not just the what change or what they're giving you as the what, but listening for that SCARF model in terms of which aspect of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, or fairness may be impacting them, and what you might be able to do about re-engaging them in one of those. Thoughts, comments, not seeing the chat. Is there anything, Oge or Chantal, that would be good to address in this moment?
So something that quite a few people have mentioned in terms of changes that are impacting them are organizational changes, remote work, and of course the pandemic. So it's just some common themes that we're seeing with the audience.
Great, thank you. So again, this is different in our world because rarely do we have spaces and time where such unity, if I can use that word, or similarity is happening around an event. And so we do have these events that are impacting so many of us. And I would just say, again, please give yourself and others more grace, that on top of the ones you mentioned, there's like a whole list of others. If there was a visual I could put here, it would be the iceberg that in my diversity, equity, inclusion work, we use a lot for identity, but it would be very similar here, that the change or what we talk about is just what people see on the surface. There's so many other ways that change is impacting us and impacting others around us. And so when someone is, you're kind of frustrated and you're wondering what's happening, just know that they may be doing everything they can just to bring the best part of them to work, and it may be all you're seeing. And just be able to, again, figure out how to lean in and get curious and get engaged so that others feel like they may be able to share more with you, not because it gives an excuse or causes everything to be put on hold, but it gives you a little more ability to relate to what might be happening and give you the ability to make better decisions around timing or timeliness or the ability to give feedback. So more around the awareness of self and others and managing change. We can't stop the flow and the pace of change that is happening around us, but what we can do is really dig into our self-awareness and our other awareness. And by that, I mean being aware of yourself and your colleagues and creating the space to understand that and be able to understand that just like you're going through changes, both voluntary changes and involuntary changes, others are doing the same. I thought it was really profound the other day when I was talking to a colleague who's gone through quite a bit of change. They have a new job and also got engaged and added a new dog to their new home. And so they were expressing to someone that they were a little sleep deprived and realizing that they're kind of out of touch with some things. And the response they got was, well, you know, you decided all these things. So I don't know what's wrong. Like, why are you having such a hard time? And I thought that is not the response we want to have. That while someone may have made choices that create change on top of all the changes that we have, we still need to offer empathy. For example, I've had several friends travel and do the best that they could with COVID precautions, and yet they ended up being COVID positive at best or sick, even if vaccinated. And again, what is needed there is self-awareness and other awareness, the empathy of like, man, that really is awful that in trying to get on with your life, see your child that you haven't seen or a family member or go have fun, that was the outcome. With self-awareness, I'm also acknowledging that just because I may have friends who that happened to, I also have friends who've traveled, who've gone places, and who are completely well and nothing has happened and they didn't get not even a cold. And so again, being able to create a whole picture and not just a one-sided picture around what may be happening. And upskilling and branding is a must. So with what Oge gave me as feedback, with many of you talking about company changes and career changes and this working remotely, it is so important to upskill and create a brand. And so I'll just pause and take a little moment with that. That means that if we've added a new skill set, or in your world of project management, if you've added a new tool, don't be shy. You've got to let people know that that's a new tool you have. Try the tools out. I love one of our particular project managers that I work with quite a bit. She'll try a new tool, but she'll be honest and say, I've been working on understanding this tool better, but I thought I'd be brave and try it out with you all. And while we may have a little bit of bumps along the way, it's so fun for me even to be taught new tools, new skills, and find new ways of approaching projects and getting through projects. And so, then I often see that particular colleague as someone with more skills than others, not necessarily because she has more skills, but because she's constantly sharing with us, her learnings. The other is brand. Who do I think of as the go-to person who may have more tools in their toolbox for me managing a complex project? Her. So it's really important to think through what are the skills I may need, that the way I've been doing things, even if it's for 6 months, may not be the way things are needing to be done. If the team that I'm managing is having a hard time getting through the project and we're not making our deadlines, how do I go back and find research, think through a different skill set that may be important? Because I promise you what will happen is your brand will improve, not because you drove everyone through the project or kind of said, well, it's your project. It's just my job is just asking where you are on it. Where you can build a better brand is really being able to be one of those managers of the experience and of the knowledge to say, let's try this. Or why don't we pause and see where we may be being stuck? And a manager that definitely went way up on the brand scale for me was one who put time on my and several other people's calendar and said, I noticed you've been missing our weekly 15-minute huddles. And I just thought, why don't I check in with you? That meant so much because it helped me to build better trust, realizing that they weren't choosing to decide, Susie just doesn't want to participate. They were acknowledging there's probably a reason based on so many org changes, so many demands that I couldn't make their meeting. So they were going to put time that worked for me. And that really helped along with the brand as well. And I would say that was a very good example of other awareness, of realizing there's probably a reason people aren't making my daily or weekly huddle. So why don't I find a different way to meet them where they're at? So here, the inclusion, and that's again, even with what I just talked about in terms of my colleagues, supporting yourself and others. How do you empower yourself and how do you empower others? In that example, my colleague, yes, she's being nice. Yes, she's being empathic. Yes, she's meeting me where I am, but she's also empowering herself when she knows she needs some of my thought leadership and the others that she reached out to, rather than become a casualty of our inability to make her meeting or a victim of it. She empowered herself by saying, okay, I'm going to empower them to give me the information I need by getting on their calendar, setting the agenda, helping them know what 2 questions I want answered before we get up to the meeting, and making those 15 minutes really productive. Well, that way we all walk away with a win. She's empowered with the information she needs. Did it cost her more 15-minute time increments? Absolutely. But did she get her project done on time? Yes. And so being able to pause and reflect on what may be happening, focus on what you can control. While she may or may not, I haven't discussed it with her in this particular example that I'm thinking of, may or may not have wanted to add more time to a packed schedule. She knew she could control how to find time to meet with me and others, and accept that there are things she couldn't control, and then move from there, and empowering to act where she could by setting up the time and keeping others engaged, and curiosity, saying while on the call, so would a better time, did this work for you for me to just check in this way? Is there a different way that might help? Is there a different way that you'd like to share your thought leadership? And so that was phenomenal. And then I found and felt cared for. I was very present and available for the meeting that was set. And it validated for me that my thoughts are important. And I will tell you, every time there is the huddle of everyone on my calendar and I am available, I go out of my way to be there because I know that I'm valued and I know that my time was valued. And then the asking open-ended questions of others to see in the example I just gave, is there anything else that might be more helpful to you? Do you understand what's happening? For us, we use a lot of Mural board. We use a lot of project planner. So just asking if those were understood. So as you see, it also just says acknowledge where you are and where others may be, and create that space for the dialogue if there's a difference, and then awareness of the acknowledgement, building that trust. Okay.
Susie, are you wrapping up here, or did you have a few slides that you were going to
finish? Oh, just a couple of slides. Yep. I just thought you had a question. I'm sorry.
No.
Sorry about that. Oh, let me get myself back to where I wanted to be. Oh, pressing the wrong button. There we go. Okay. So in that awareness of self and others, again, just as a reminder, find out how you're being impacted. We already talked about using the SCARF model. Use a talent assessment or some other way to accept those org changes, see what support you may need, and then move through the SCARF model. And then identify the threat. So here's just a place that we'd like for you all to get interactive in the chat. A situation of a major leadership transition. So whether that's you changing companies, so you have new leadership, or new leadership happening to be a part of your own team, or a project that you're leading. I'd love for you to tell us what are some of the certainty threats and rewards that happen to you in this change. So whether it's one in the past or happening right now, or one you anticipate happening in the near future, there's you're owning a project and there's been a major change in the team members or the leaders. What are the threats using the SCARF model, and what are some of the rewards? So feel free to put them in the chat. And then how can you identify ways to alleviate the threat? So thinking about those threats, also just feel free to put in the chat, what are the ways that you can alleviate that threat? Right, as we're wrapping up and going towards questions, I just want to again encourage you to act. So supporting yourself and others, remember that as a leader, we don't know what are all the changes that are impacting people. So just be curious, become more aware. And here's a little tip on when you don't know what to say or you're wondering, just really acknowledge to people that I see you. Like I see you trying, I see you coming when you can. Listen and then be able to acknowledge you hear them. It doesn't mean that you agree or disagree, but just make people know that they're heard, have them know they're heard. And then if they're really wanting a feedback or wanting something, it's okay to say, you know, I really need to take that in and I don't know what to say. I'm in the middle of coaching a client with some difficulties like that. And then also being able to say you want to understand. So in taking action now with those winning things, remember the why and the whom. Remember to include your own feelings and how you're impacted in others. Focus in on knowing yourself and others by getting curious. And then using the SCARF model, really pick how you're going to adapt better to change by being more aware of your triggers, eliminating as many of the threats, or at least managing your threats, and really looking for those rewards, as Scott also said. Find the reward. Find the cookie, the dessert of life that can get you to act and to get through that change. And then the now, take action now, because if not now, when? All right, going to turn it over to you, Oge.
Okay, well, thank you, Susie. Thank you so much for such an insightful presentation. We have a little bit less than 15 minutes left, so we'll just move right into Q&A. I will give you all the opportunity to unmute yourselves and ask your questions directly to Susie, or you can put them in the chat and we can ask them on your behalf, but this is your time. So please take advantage of the opportunity to ask questions.
Especially any questions around real life situations, happy to answer them. Or at least create a dialogue.
Okay, so I'll actually ask one to start us off a bit. So one of the things you talked about a lot is the importance of self-awareness, knowing ourselves, knowing our strengths and weaknesses. So what are some ways that, some very tactical ways that we can actually work on that?
Yeah, so I think one of them is just slowing down when you have a feeling. So if you're feeling really frustrated, or, you know, if you notice you're having a hard time falling asleep, you're waking up. And when I worked with veterans, we would talk about rent-free space in the brain. If there's a particular project or person having rent-free space in your brain, meaning that you find yourself carrying it even outside of work or after work, think through, okay, let me pause and really process this. So rather than just realizing that you consistently are ruminating or complaining to someone about a particular person or project, that would be a perfect time to stop and say, this must need the SCARF model is what I'll call it. This must need a little evaluation. First, let me think about that other. Let me really go there and say, what might be the threats and the rewards? What might be helping this person and what might be causing them difficulty if I put myself in their shoes? Then really look in the mirror and say, how am I impacting that? So if you really take a moment to be honest with yourself and say, what is it that I'm bringing to the table? If this is the outcome, if that's the way people are receiving it, rather than say, well, that's just them. I know I'm following all the best practices of project management, so that's on them. That's not a winning attitude, nor is it great leadership. We've got to really look at self. Is there a trigger I'm not even aware of, whether it's a tone, whether it's the way my emails come across? In a real life example, one particular colleague I work with, towards the end of a project, when the date gets a little bit close, he really starts to amp multiple times, like from first thing before, like by 7:45, 8 in the morning, it's like, okay, where are you on the project? So it's technically for us before the space of time of work. And then by halfway through the day, what's going on? And it doesn't help anyone. And so when they then are reporting, no one's engaging, no one's giving feedback or following up, that would be a great place for self-reflection in that example, because it's the approach that is creating some of the inability to move forward. While everyone can see they really want it to move forward, the approach they're bringing to it is creating more harm than good. So that would be the other, I would say, with self is really be open. If you notice that someone's giving you feedback, even if you don't like the feedback, being able to say, where's the truth in that? If I assume positive intent, even if what they're saying may be true, I don't feel is true, or even if what they're saying is something that I viscerally disagree with, they wouldn't have an opportunity. Very rarely, I'll pull my psychology card on this one, very rarely do people have any motive to make something up. So if it's something that they're giving us feedback, it's really important to check in with others and say, not in a justifying way of like, you know what, I can't believe so-and-so said this to me. Do you think that? Because then that friend already knows how to answer. But if you say, you know what, I've been getting this feedback and someone said this to me and I truly am curious. I really want to know, could you possibly help me see where they may be coming from? Very different way. Asking the same question, one gives me a very surefire way that I'm going to continue to see myself in the mirror through the lens I want to see myself. And the other gives someone permission to give me a little bit of feedback that I may or may not really want to hear.
That is a very good point. I think it's important to place ourselves in positions where people can give us honest feedback and not sort of set us up for hearing what we want to hear or just feeling like they can't give us feedback at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from one of the audience members. She says, it seems that we have many layers to use SCARF. Would you recommend teaching to members of the team during planning or retrospective meetings to help understand the roles of our users?
Love the question and the, almost an embedded suggestion, 100%. I actually first learned SCARF when someone was rolling out a project where all of us as leaders were going to need to cascade a major change to many others. And with the SCARF model, they first had us really, both the change curve and the SCARF model, actually, they put the change curve on this Jumbotron place. It was back when we were all in, big, huge conference rooms, and we each were given a piece of paper in a company that hated printing. And we each were able to circle because they knew this was going to be big, but they knew every leader in that room needed to truly buy into the change. Even if they weren't happy, at least become really aware of where they were before they were going to go share that with others and try to get others to adapt to the change. So 100% think it's important to use. The SCARF model is really popular. And so you'll be able to get all kinds of tools pretty easily on it, where you can help team members read an article, hear a podcast, look at a model, and kind of walk themselves through the threats and rewards. I will also say when I've used it for my own clients before they adapt to a change and move their company through a change with executives, using those threats and opportunities, rewards are so key because it creates messaging that you need. And especially in your world, you need that messaging. You need to be able to tell people where the poop is, if we want to call it that, and just acknowledge it. Like this, and this are going to be the threats and the parts that aren't fun. Hello, but here are the rewards. If we're able to get through this, and this, these are the rewards. So yes, I would agree that it's really important and helpful to roll it out to team members and those that you're leading.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question, kind of a combination of questions. So I'll just read all of it to you. Where's the truth? I like that phrase in reference to inbound feedback and criticism. Is there a method to deliver feedback such that the truth in the message is heard first, or where there's kind of no frills, no extra just delivery, or will that come off as too harsh?
Yeah, so there's so much, like you said, to unpack in that. There's whole different talks on communication. So I think first, truth is relative, whether people like to believe it or not, because when it comes to interpersonal relationships, it's based on perception. So we will go around and around for 100 years on truth if we're going to argue about how, if Oge and I were having a discussion and I say, you know what, that was offensive to me. And she says, that's a lie. That is not true. There was no way I meant for that to be insulting. Then we're never going to get anywhere. If instead we look at perception, her perception is she meant this with all good intent, had no malintent. And my perception is to go in hearing that that's her truth, her perception. But my perception is it was absolutely insulting and exclusive, and she trusts me. Then we're both able to say, well, we have very different perceptions around the same thing. Where do we either use the SCARF model or another model to say, okay, she will never convince me of my perception being different. And I clearly am not going to convince her of her perception being different. So how do we create the outside goal of where we want to get to? So if we both say, well, okay, Susie, we agree, okay, where we really want to get to still is moving the project this way, then Oge can say, okay, what wording could I use differently to not have it be insulting? And I could say, this might be, and I could offer, if you can please use these words, I'm going to be able to hear them better, right? And then we move forward in a collective truth. So hopefully that answers that question. And then the how of feedback I've had to learn coming from a blunt culture into less blunt cultures. I've had to learn, what is my objective? Is my objective getting the truth out there, or is my objective having myself be heard? And whenever I go with the latter, I really want to be heard. I'm a different person. My husband, as we're working from home, he gets to overhear this today, and he loves to give feedback on the delivery, right? Like if I deliver something in a particular way, it's not heard, where if I can deliver it in a different way, it can be heard. So I think that that's also important, is that even if at first we're not able to unpack our truth in a way that can be heard, that we practice with others, or we practice even with that person to say, I'm not sure how to do this, but this is my best effort.
All right, so we have one last question. Susie, if you could give just a quick 30-second answer, and then I know you have something that you want to offer the audience. This kind of picks up on what you were just talking about. What if your boss ignores your feedback, both verbal and written?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There are bosses, there are team members, there are partners, there are, significant others that just don't take feedback, no matter which package you provide it. As long as it's not what their perception is, they're just not open. And that can be a very difficult space. So I'm just going to give you, the truth is, it is really difficult to work or live or grow with people who it's either the way they perceive it or nothing. What I will say to that is you can consistently make your best effort, and then also offer the you. Listen to be understood, and listen to understand, and then speak from your truth. I would say that trying to convince people is where things go off the rails, whether in marriages, in work relationships. If you think that you're going to finally be able to share the right type of feedback to someone who's just not open to it, and you're trying to convince them of something, you're gonna find yourself really just exacerbated and frustrated. So I would say do the best to know yourself, be kind to others, and try to give that feedback in most positive way as possible. And even try to find back to the rewards. Where is the reward, so that maybe they can hear it from that way.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for your questions. I think we'll have to wrap up here. Susie, do you want to just talk about this very quickly?
Yeah, so really quick, just wanted to participate with today's conference and thank each of you for doing the right thing of self-awareness and growth by attending a conference on a Saturday. Huge investment of time. And so with that, wanted to offer a free 30-minute session of an assessment. So self-awareness, I wanted to really put my own kind of skin in the game and offer through our Thrive Group International, offer a free assessment and coaching session. So the best way to go about that would be to either put it in the chat, because Oge and Chantel can forward that on to me. But the best way is to reach out to me on LinkedIn under Dr. Susie SUSY Francis. And you can reach out and just let me know that you'd like to take me up on that free assessment and 30-minute coaching session, and I'd be happy to provide it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Susie. Thank you again, everyone, for your questions. We appreciate your engagement and insights. Susie, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to participate and offer your insights to our audience. And as a token of our appreciation, we just have a small certificate that we'd like to share with you. And we will, of course,
Oh,
send
thank
this to you.
you.
We'll send you the actual certificate after today's presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you to the audience again. And after this, we will have a quick 15-minute break for networking. Please visit our sponsors. Please visit our certification groups. And please do not forget to fill out the surveys so we can get your feedback and also so that you can get your PDUs. Thank you again, and we will see you at 3:15.